The rain had started an hour before the carriages arrived at Onwick Assembly Rooms, and by the time Eloise Hartley stepped through the entrance, her hem was already dark with mud and her spirits darker still. 23 years old, a vicar's daughter, too educated for her station, too honest for polite society, and as her father's housekeeper, Mrs. Drummond had informed her that morning, far too late to be considered marriageable by anyone who mattered.
What is the meaning
Eloise
of this?
did not particularly care about being marriageable. What she cared about was being invisible. The assembly rooms glittered with 300 candles reflected in crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of tallow and perfume, and the particular desperation of mothers positioning their daughters like chess pieces across a battlefield of eligible bachelors. Eloise recognized the game. She had simply stopped playing it. She moved along the wall toward the windows where the rain made silver tracks down the glass, and the noise of the room became something she could observe rather than participate in. This was her preferred position at these events. Observer. Witness, the girl who stood in corners and noticed everything and was herself noticed by no one, until Lady Beaumont noticed her. The Viscountess was 60 if she was a day, with a face like a dried apple and a tongue that could strip paint from wood. She swept across the room trailing daughters and nieces like hunting dogs on a scent, and when she reached the refreshment table where Eloise had been attempting to become one with the wallpaper, she stopped. "Miss Hartley," the name came out like an accusation. "I was not aware your father permitted you to attend assemblies. I thought he kept you quite occupied with parish accounts." Eloise set down her glass of weak lemonade with careful precision. "My father believes in the value of community, Lady Beaumont, even for daughters who keep accounts." "How modern of him." Lady Beaumont's smile had teeth in it. "Though I wonder if he's aware of your tendency to discuss reform at dinner parties. My nephew was quite shocked last month when you defended that dreadful Wollstonecraft woman. A vindication of the rights of woman, wasn't it? Hardly appropriate reading for a young lady." The room had begun to quiet, conversations paused, heads turned. Eloise felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came before these moments, the moments when she could either retreat into acceptable silence or speak and pay the price. She spoke. "Mary Wollstonecraft argued that women are not naturally inferior to men, but appear so due to lack of education. I find the logic sound, though I understand it's more comfortable to believe otherwise." Lady Beaumont's face went the color of uncooked dough. "More comfortable," she repeated. Her voice had gone very quiet, which was worse than if she'd shouted. "My dear girl, let me offer you some wisdom that your mother, God rest her soul, clearly did not live to provide. There is a reason no gentleman has offered for you, a reason you stand alone at every assembly, while girls half your wit are claimed for every dance." She leaned in. The room leaned in with her. "No gentleman," Lady Beaumont said, "dances with a vicar's daughter who speaks of reform." The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of sentence. Around them, the assembly room had gone completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Eloise was aware of approximately 60 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting for her reaction, waiting to see if the vicar's too clever daughter would finally learn her place. She opened her mouth to respond, though what she would have said she never knew, because that was when someone picked up a glass of wine from the refreshment table, turned as if to move away, and managed to collide with Lady Beaumont's elbow, in a movement that looked entirely accidental and resulted in an entire glass of claret emptying itself down the front of Eloise's dress. The liquid was cold and shocking and smelled of alcohol and humiliation. It spread across the pale muslin of her gown like blood, like evidence of violence. She stood there dripping while Lady Beaumont made sounds of theatrical distress, and the room erupted into barely concealed laughter. "Oh, my dear, how dreadfully clumsy of me," though perhaps Lady Beaumont's voice carried across the sudden noise. "Perhaps it's for the best. Now you have an excuse to leave early. I'm sure your father needs those accounts tallied." More laughter, sharper now, edged with the particular cruelty of people who had found an acceptable target. Eloise stood in the center of the room in her ruined dress and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not shame, rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage at a world that punished intelligence in women and rewarded cruelty in ladies and made sport of girls who dared to have opinions about their own oppression. She was drawing breath to say something unforgivable when a voice spoke from behind her left shoulder. "Then I shall have the honor." The voice was deep, male, quiet in a way that somehow carried through the noise without needing to rise in volume. The kind of voice that expected to be heard because it was accustomed to being obeyed. Eloise turned. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, and lean in the way of men who had been made lean rather than born to it. His coat was expensive, but at least 2 seasons old, cut in a military style that suggested he'd worn a uniform more recently than evening dress. His hair was dark shot through with silver, and his face was the kind that might have been handsome if it had ever learned how to smile. It had not learned how to smile. What it had learned was how to carry a scar that ran from his left temple down to the hinge of his jute in a pale line that looked like lightning frozen in flesh. "I beg your pardon," Eloise said. The man looked at her for the first time. His eyes were the color of winter sea gray and deep and holding weather. "You said," he told her calmly, "that no gentleman would dance with you. I am offering to prove that statement incorrect." "I did not say that. Lady Beaumont said that." "Then I am offering to prove Lady Beaumont incorrect, which is, I confess, something I have wanted to do for several years now." Despite everything, the wine, the humiliation, the 60 pairs of watching eyes, Eloise felt her mouth twitch. "Several years," she said. "She told me in 1818 that my scar made me unfit for polite society. I have been waiting for an opportunity to demonstrate that she is an authority on neither fitness nor society." This time Eloise did smile. Small, brief, but real. "That's very kind," she said. "But unnecessary. I was just leaving." "In that dress," he glanced down at the wine stain, "you'll catch your death in the rain, and give Lady Beaumont the satisfaction of driving you out in disgrace. Far better, I think, to dance. To prove that some gentlemen prefer intelligence to decorative silence." He held out his hand. It was gloved in gray kidskin, steady, patient, waiting for her decision. Eloise looked at that hand. She looked at the room full of people waiting to see if she would accept or refuse. She looked at Lady Beaumont, whose expression suggested she was watching a rat consider whether to take poison cheese. "I don't know you," Eloise said. "No," the man agreed, "but I know you." "That's impossible. We've never met." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of something that had once been amusement. "Haven't we?" he said, and held out his hand again. Eloise took it. His grip was warm even through the gloves. Firm, the kind of grip that suggested he would not let her fall even if she stumbled. He led her onto the floor with the kind of automatic competence that suggested he'd learned to dance the same place he'd learned to march in formation, following orders, turning motion into muscle memory, so complete it required no thought. The musicians, sensing drama, began a waltz. "You're limping," Eloise observed as they began to move. "Observant. And you haven't told me your name." "Ashford," he said after a brief pause. "And you are Miss Eloise Hartley, Vicar's daughter, parish accountant, reader of Wollstonecraft and defender of women's education, currently residing at Chillingham Rectory after your father accepted the living 3 weeks ago." Eloise missed a step. He steadied her, without comment, his bad leg adjusting automatically to support her weight. "How do you know all that?" she demanded. "I make it my business to know who lives on my land." "Your land. The Chillingham living is in my gift. Your father wrote to request permission to accept the bishop's offer. I granted it. You signed the letter as witness." Eloise's mind was racing. The Chillingham living, the Duke's gift, which meant you're Westmore, she said. "I am. The Duke of Westmore." Also accurate. "You didn't mention that when you asked me to dance." He executed a turn with the same military precision he brought to everything else. "You didn't ask. You said you didn't know me. I gave you my name. That you failed to recognize it is hardly my fault." "Most dukes," Eloise said with some asperity, "lead with the title. In my experience, they prefer people to know exactly who they're speaking to. It reinforces the hierarchy. I am not most dukes." "Clearly." They danced in silence for a moment. The room was still watching, would probably watch for the rest of the evening, but somehow it felt less oppressive with his hand steady at her back and his attention focused on her face rather than performing for the audience. "You're angry," he observed. "I'm mortified. Anger is more useful than mortification. Is that a general principle or personal experience?" "Both." He guided her through another turn. "Though I find mortification usually follows anger at a sufficient interval to make the latter seem justified in retrospect." Despite herself, Eloise laughed. It came out startled and genuine and entirely inappropriate for someone who had just been publicly humiliated. "That's very philosophical for a duke," she said. "I read Cicero, his letters, not his speeches." Eloise's hand tightened involuntarily on his shoulder. "The private correspondence. To Atticus, yes. Do you know them?" "I've been translating them from Latin as an exercise." His expression shifted, just slightly, just enough that she noticed. The private letters, he said carefully, are very different from the public orations. Completely different. He's anxious, uncertain. He complains about money and his son-in-law and whether he's made the right political choices. It's human, Ashford finished. He's human in a way the forum's speeches never show. Exactly. Eloise was aware she was leaning forward slightly, engaged in a way she hadn't been engaged in conversation since she couldn't remember when. He's performing in the speeches. Even when he's sincere, he's performing sincerity. But in the letters to Atticus, he's just himself, talking to the one person who will hear the real version. They had stopped dancing. Neither of them had noticed. Everyone needs an Atticus, Eloise said quietly. Someone who receives the honest version. The private one. The one that doesn't have to be. She stopped herself, realized she was saying far too much to a stranger. A duke. A man she'd met less than 10 minutes ago in the middle of the worst humiliation of her life. Polished, Ashford finished for her. The one that doesn't have to be polished for public consumption. Yes. Do you have an Atticus, Miss Hartley? The question was gentle, but it landed like a knife between her ribs. No, she said. And then because he'd been honest, because he'd defended her when he had no reason to, because something about his winter sea eyes suggested he would understand. I write letters to a soldier, through the Relief Society, a Corporal Ward, but I've never met him. I don't know if he reads them. Mrs. Calvert says he's recovering from wounds and can't respond yet. So I just write, and hope someone is listening. Ashford went very still. You write to him, he said. His voice had changed. Gone careful in a way that suggested he was choosing each word with the attention other men gave to diffusing artillery. What do you write about? Everything. Nothing. The wall, Hadrian's Wall. I walk there sometimes. Philosophy, books, reform, though I probably shouldn't. Mrs. Calvert says I should keep to cheerful topics, but I find enforced cheerfulness exhausting. So I just... She stopped, laughed at herself. I'm doing it again. Talking too much. My father says I don't know when to stop. Don't. Don't what? Don't stop. He was looking at her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. Some people can speak on paper in ways they cannot manage in rooms. It seems a useful faculty. Essential even. Do you write letters, Your Grace? Not until recently, he said, and something in the way he said it made her think there was a story there. A complicated one. The music had stopped. Around them couples were separating, bowing, moving off the floor. The dance was over. Had been over for some time, probably. I should go, Eloise said. My dress is ruined and I've monopolized enough of your time. You haven't monopolized anything. I asked you to dance. You took pity on me. I took exception to Lady Beaumont. There's a difference. Eloise looked up at him. He was watching her with that same steady attention, as if she were a text he was trying to translate. As if she mattered enough to read carefully. Thank you, she said, for the dance, for the defense, for treating me like someone worth talking to about Cicero. You are worth talking to about Cicero. He said it as if it were obvious, as if it were a fact that required no debate. You are worth talking to about a great many things, I suspect. He bowed. She curtsied. And then he did something that surprised her more than anything else that had happened that evening. He smiled. It was small, unpracticed. The smile of a man who had forgotten how and was just now remembering. But it was real. Good evening, Miss Hartley, he said. I suspect we will see each other again. Chillingham is not so large that neighbors can avoid one another indefinitely. Then he turned and walked away, limping slightly, trailing silence and speculation in his wake. Eloise stood in the middle of the assembly floor and watched him go. Around her, the room erupted into whispers. She ignored them. She was thinking about Cicero, about Atticus, about private letters and public faces and the strange, careful way the Duke of Westmore had looked at her when she'd mentioned writing to a soldier, as if he knew something she didn't, as if he were keeping a secret. Mrs. Drummond collected her 20 minutes later, full of questions and opinions about dukes who danced with vicars' daughters and what it meant and what people would say. Eloise let the words wash over her without really hearing them. She was thinking about letters. She was thinking about honesty. And she was thinking that she needed to write to Corporal Ward tonight while the memory of winter sea eyes and careful questions was still fresh, because somehow impossibly, she suspected the Duke of Westmore would understand. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the Duke of Westmore had been reading her letters for 2 months. Every single one. 2 months earlier, February 1821. Westmore Hall sat in the border country above Alnwick like a stone fist raised against the northern weather. It was not a welcoming house. It was not designed to be welcoming. It was designed to defend, to endure, to stand against Scottish raiders and border thieves and the kind of weather that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. Lucian Ashford, 5th Duke of Westmore, sat in the library with a fire going and a book open and the conscious awareness that he was not reading. He had not been reading for 6 months. He had been staring at pages and seeing Waterloo. The library at Westmore was his preferred prison. High ceilings, dark wood, shelves from floor to ceiling filled with books his father had collected and his grandfather before him. 400 years of accumulated knowledge, and Lucian could not focus on a single page without his mind sliding away toward things he did not want to remember and could not forget. His secretary Jarvis entered with the Morning Post on a silver tray, set it on the desk with practiced quietness, did not comment on the fact that the Duke had been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours without moving. Jarvis had been with him at Waterloo. He knew what silence meant. There were 3 letters. 2 were almost certainly from his cousin Gerald, tempting once again to suggest that Lucian was unfit to manage the estate and should consider appointing a guardian to oversee his affairs. Gerald, 7 years younger, ambitious, and perpetually resentful of being born too late to inherit, had been making this suggestion with increasing frequency since Lucian had returned from Belgium with a scar on his face and a tendency to wake at night with his heart slamming against his ribs and the smell of gunpowder in his throat. Lucian left those letters unopened. The 3rd letter was smaller, written on plain paper, addressed to Corporal J. Ward, care of Westmore Hall, Northumberland. Lucian stared at it. John Ward had died at Waterloo. Lucian knew this with the particular precision of a man who had been standing 3 feet away when the cannonball took off half of Ward's chest. He had held the corporal while he bled out, had written to Ward's mother afterward, a letter he'd revised 6 times because there were no words adequate to the task of explaining why her son was dead and Lucian was alive when by all rights it should have been the other way around. Ward's mother had died 2 months later. Grief, the village said. Though Lucian suspected it was more complicated than that, grief usually was. He should set the letter aside. Should ask Jarvis to write a response explaining that Corporal Ward was deceased and his correspondence should be redirected. Should do what any reasonable person would do when receiving mail for a dead man. Instead, he picked up the letter opener. The handwriting was nothing like he expected. He had expected charity correspondence to resemble the pamphlets Mrs. Calvert of the Northumberland Relief Society distributed at church, sincere uniform faintly Sunday school in its cheerfulness. The kind of well-meaning drivel that assumed soldiers wanted to hear about English gardens and wouldn't notice they were being condescended to. What he found instead was handwriting that tilted very slightly to the left, as though the writer were always leaning towards something just out of frame. Dear Corporal Ward, it began, I have been assigned your name by the Society, which is to say that I have not been assigned your name so much as a number on a list which Mrs. Calvert assures me represents a living soldier of some kind, somewhere in the general vicinity of England. I am meant to write you cheerful news and descriptions of the countryside because the thinking is that soldiers abroad or convalescing will benefit from knowing that the country they defended is still here and tolerably pleasant. I will do my best to oblige, though I must warn you that I find enforced cheerfulness rather exhausting and may lapse occasionally into honesty. Lucian stopped reading. Read that sentence again. May lapse occasionally into honesty. He read the rest of the letter. Then he read it again. The writer, a Miss E. Hartley, she signed herself, though the Society's rules apparently suggested she should sign Miss E. Ward to preserve anonymity, described Northumberland in February. Gray and cold, the wind attempting to come through the study window for 4 days, running the gap, stuffed with a periodical about crop rotation, which seemed an apt use for it. She described the moors as looking like the abandoned thoughts of someone who has given up on the sentence halfway through. She described Hadrian's Wall. I walked along a section of it last week, she wrote. There is something in it that I find useful in the way that uselessness can sometimes be useful, a thing that simply endures without needing to justify the enduring. Lucian sat very still, a thing that simply endures without needing to justify the enduring. He read the postscript 3 times. P.S. I was told to sign Miss E. Ward, as the Society has rules about preserving a certain anonymous quality to the correspondence. I have decided to sign my actual name instead, as I cannot quite see the point of writing honestly to someone whilst lying about who I am. The fire crackled. Outside, the February wind moved across the high ground with its ancient patient sound. Lucian sat with the letter in his hands and felt something he had not felt in 2 years. Interest. Not pleasure exactly. Not yet. But the absence of the gray weight that had been sitting on his chest since Belgium. The first moment in 6 months when his mind had focused on something other than the past. He should write to Mrs. Calvert, should explain that Corporal Ward had died in service, should ask that Miss E. Hartley be reassigned to some other soldier who could actually respond to her letters. Instead, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer of his desk. He told himself he would write tomorrow. Tomorrow became a week. The second letter arrived on a Thursday, 18th February, 1821. Dear Corporal Ward, it began. I have been thinking about silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that fills a room where people know each other well enough not to need speech, but the performed kind. The silence that is not quiet at all, but is rather a great deal of noise compressed into a very small, respectable space. She wrote about her father, about being surrounded by decent people who would be astonished to learn what went on in her head, about the way proximity to dying stripped away pretense. I am reaching for it in these letters, she wrote. I hope you do not mind. In the margin, he was not proud of this. Lucian wrote 3 words in pencil, I do not mind. The third letter arrived in early March, and by then Lucian had stopped pretending he was going to redirect the correspondence. He read each letter the day it arrived, read them again at night, read them until he had them memorize the rhythm of her sentences, the particular way she thought in tangents, and then circled back to her point, the honesty that came through every line like light through water. She wrote about philosophy, about reform, about the specific quality of being a woman with a mind in a world that preferred women without them. She wrote about Cicero, the private Cicero she specified, the one in the letters to Atticus. Not the great orator, but the anxious human who worried about his roof and needed someone to tell. I should like someday to be someone's Atticus, she wrote in the third letter, the one who receives the honest version. Lucian read that line sitting at his desk at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep the nightmare of Waterloo, still fresh enough that his hands were shaking. The one who receives the honest version. He took out a sheet of paper, wrote Dear Miss Hartley, stared at it for 20 minutes, tore it in half. He could not write to her. She thought she was writing to a corporal, to someone convalescing somewhere, to a soldier who might understand what it meant to see pretense stripped away. If he wrote back as himself, as the Duke, as the man who employed her father, as someone with power and position and all the social weight that made honest conversation impossible, she would stop writing, would retreat into polite formality, would lose the voice that came through in these letters like a hand reaching through darkness. He could not write to her, but he could not stop reading. The fourth letter arrived in late March. Her father had accepted the Chillingham living. They were moving north in April, 12 miles from Westmore Hall. I feel something about this that I cannot precisely name, she wrote. Not grief because I have not been especially happy here. Not excitement because I have learned to distrust anticipation. Something in between. She wrote about translation, about working through Cicero's private correspondence and discovering a completely different person from the public orator. He is anxious, uncertain, petty, sometimes she wrote. He complains about his son-in-law. He frets about money. I find this extraordinarily comforting, that the man who wrote De Republica was also a man who worried about his roof and needed to say so to someone. Lucian read this and thought about his own letters home from Waterloo. The careful edited versions he'd sent to his mother before she died. The things he hadn't said because there was no one to say them to. No Atticus to receive the honest version. He opened his writing desk again. Wrote, Dear Miss Hartley. Wrote, I understand. Wrote, I am the man who has been reading your letters. Wrote, I am not who you think I am. He stared at the words for an hour. Then he tore the page into pieces small enough that no one could reconstruct it. The fifth letter arrived 3 days after she moved to Chillingham. It was shorter than the others. Written quickly, he thought. The handwriting a little less controlled. The village is small, she wrote. The rectory is drafty. My father is pleased, which is good. I myself am adjusting. Then, almost as an afterthought, I attended the Alnwick Assembly last week and spoke with a man named Ashford, who I afterward discovered to be the Duke of Westmore. He did not mention this at the time, which I thought peculiar, though. On reflection, I think I understand it. There is something in him that does not wish to be handled. He kept himself very carefully. A pause. He could see her hesitating pen hovering over paper. This is the most interesting thing about him. He listened not in the polite way people listen when they are waiting for their turn to speak, but as though the listening was the point. I am unaccustomed to this. I find I should like to speak to him again. I mention this because I think you would find it interesting, or perhaps because I need to tell someone, and you are the someone I have elected. Lucian read this letter standing at his desk because he had not thought to sit down. She found him interesting. She wanted to speak to him again. She had written it to him, to the corporal, to the ghost, to the man who received the honest version, not knowing that he and him were the same person wearing two different faces. There is something in him that does not wish to be handled. This was he pressed two fingers to the bridge of his nose, the most precise description of himself he had encountered in 6 years, and it had been offered without malice, as a thing to be understood rather than condemned. He took out a fresh sheet of paper, wrote, "Dear Miss Hartley." This time he did not stop. "Dear Miss Hartley, I do not know how to begin this because I have not written a personal letter in 7 years, and the skill requires practice which I have denied myself by not trusting anyone enough to practice on. I am the man who has been reading your letters. I am not Corporal Ward. I am a duke in a library who has been receiving correspondence meant for a dead man and who has been, for reasons I could not properly examine, and still cannot unable to redirect it. I should have redirected it. You asked in your second letter whether war makes you honest. Yes, not immediately. Immediately it does the reverse. You become very skilled at existing in very small moments because the larger frame of things becomes impossible to hold. But afterward, the dishonesty of ordinary life becomes very loud. The pretense of being well when you are not well. The mask of presence when you have left pieces of yourself in fields in Belgium. You strip away the mask slowly, which I imagine is what you meant about women in reverse. The layers of what you are expected to be, peeling off one by one, leaving something raw underneath that does not quite know how to exist in a drawing room. You said you should like to be someone's Atticus. You should like to receive the honest version. I have been for 2 months writing letters to you in my head that I could not send. This is the first one I have written on paper. I am the Duke of Westmore. I have a scar I cannot look at, and a library I cannot leave, and a cousin who is going to challenge my fitness, and a solicitor I need to call. I was at Waterloo. I was engaged to be married and am no longer. I have not slept a full night in 6 years. I have been reading your letters, and I want you to know that every time you wrote the word honest, I thought yes, that I have been waiting without knowing I was waiting for someone to want that. You are not what I expected from Northumberland. You are, in fact, rather remarkable. I cannot send this. You have elected me as your Atticus without my knowledge, and the return of the favor requires your consent, and I have not asked for it. But if you had asked, if you had said, is there someone who would like to receive the honest version of you? I should like to have answered yes. Yes, I would. He sealed the letter, addressed it to no one, put it in the drawer with the others, told himself he would send it tomorrow. Tomorrow he knew was a lie, but lies he had learned were sometimes the only way to survive until the truth became bearable. And the truth he could not yet speak was that he had been falling in love with a voice on paper for 2 months, and he had just met the woman who owned that voice, and she did not know that the man she danced with and the man she'd been writing to were the same person. The truth was that he was going to have to tell her. The truth was that when he did, she was going to hate him. Lucian sat in his library with 5 letters from a woman who trusted him with her honest voice, and 1 letter he would never send, and he knew with the same certainty he'd known that John Ward was dying, that the charge at Waterloo was suicide, that Lady Cecily would leave him the moment she saw his scar, that this was going to end badly. But for now, for this moment, he had her words. And her words were enough to make him want to be the kind of man who deserved them, even if he never would be. Thursday came to Chillingham Rectory the way it always did, slowly, reluctantly, as though the week itself were dragging its feet toward the one day Eloise had begun to anticipate with an intensity that worried her. It had been 3 weeks since the assembly, 3 weeks since she'd danced with the Duke of Westmore and discovered that dukes could discuss Cicero and that scars could make a face more compelling rather than less. 3 weeks since she'd written to Corporal Ward about meeting a man who listened as though listening were the point. And 3 weeks of Thursday visits. The first had been unexpected. Eloise had been in the garden attempting to convince the previous vicar's rosebushes that they were not in fact dead when Mrs. Drummond had appeared with an expression that suggested the second coming was imminent and considerably less important than what she was about to announce. The Duke of Westmore to see Reverend Hartley, she'd said. In the parlor. Now. Eloise had looked down at herself, mud on her skirts, dirt under her fingernails, hair escaping its pins in a manner that suggested it had given up on respectability entirely. Tell him my father is at the church, she'd said. He'll be back within the hour. His Grace says he'll wait. For an hour. He brought a book. Eloise had found this unreasonably charming. She'd gone inside without changing, partly because she didn't want to seem like she was making an effort, partly because she suspected the Duke of Westmore was the kind of man who would appreciate honesty over pretense. She'd been correct. He'd been standing by the window when she entered, holding a volume that Eloise recognized as her father's copy of Marcus Aurelius. He'd looked up when she came in, and his slate-gray gaze had done something complicated when he saw the mud. "Miss Hartley," he'd said, "I appear to have interrupted your gardening. The roses were winning. You've provided a strategic retreat. I'm honored to be of service to your tactical withdrawal." And just like that, they'd been talking. Not the careful performed conversation of social calls, but actual discussion about Aurelius, about Stoic philosophy, about whether it was possible to maintain equanimity in the face of genuinely terrible circumstances, or whether the Stoics were simply very good at pretending. I think Eloise had said that equanimity is admirable in theory and impossible in practice, at least for most people. And yet Aurelius achieved it, or claimed to. Aurelius was an emperor. He had considerably more control over his circumstances than most people. It's easy to be philosophical when you can have someone executed for disturbing your tranquility. The Duke had smiled, that small, unpracticed smile that looked like it surprised him as much as it did her. "You don't believe in Stoicism, then?" "I believe in it as an intellectual exercise. I don't believe it's a viable approach to actually living. Real life intrudes. Emotions happen. You can't philosophy your way out of grief or rage or—" She'd stopped herself. "Love," he'd suggested quietly. "I was going to say loneliness, but love works as well." He'd looked at her for a long moment. Something had shifted in the air between them. Something that made her aware of how close he was standing, how quiet the room had become, how his attention felt like a physical thing. Then her father had returned. Reverend Hartley had taken one look at the two of them standing by the window deep in philosophical debate and had made the surprising decision to trust his daughter's judgment. He'd greeted the Duke, politely discussed parish business for precisely 10 minutes, then excused himself back to the church with a pointed comment about the altar cloth requiring mending. The Duke had made his excuses shortly after and left, and Eloise had spent the rest of the day trying to convince herself that she had not just felt what she had absolutely just felt. The second Thursday, he'd brought a question about parish boundaries and stayed for an hour discussing political economy. The third Thursday, he'd asked her opinion on proposed agricultural reforms and actually listened to her answer, not the polite listening of men waiting for women to stop talking, but the engaged listening of someone who thought her opinion might be worth having. Now it was the fourth Thursday, and Eloise was trying very hard not to watch the lane for his arrival, while simultaneously being acutely aware that it was already 2:30 and he usually arrived at 2. "You're staring at the window," her father observed from behind his newspaper. "I'm looking at the weather." "The weather has not changed in the last 5 minutes." "It might." "It won't. This is Northumberland in April. The weather is gray and will remain gray until August, at which point it will become gray with occasional rain." Eloise returned to her translation of Cicero with more force than necessary. The pen spluttered. She swore under her breath. "Language, Eloise. Cicero uses worse in his private letters. He calls Caelius, She stopped. "Never mind." Her father turned a page. "The Duke seems to have taken an interest in parish affairs. He's conscientious about his tenants. He's conscientious about you." Eloise's hand slipped. Ink bloomed across the page, obliterating 3 lines of careful translation. "That's absurd," she said. "Is it? He's a duke. I'm a vicar's daughter. He's being polite. An ally in intellectual conversation. He's being something. I'm not certain ally covers the way he looks at you." Before Eloise could formulate a response that wasn't either a lie or an admission, Mrs. Drummond appeared in the doorway with the expression that meant nobility had arrived, and was Eloise going to receive them looking like that? "His Grace," she announced, "is in the parlor." Eloise stood so quickly she knocked over the inkwell. "I should, father, will you?" "I'll be in the church," her father said without looking up from his newspaper. "For at least an hour, possibly 2. The communion silver requires polishing." "The silver was polished yesterday." "Then it requires polishing again. These things happen." He finally looked up, and his expression was gentler than his words. "Be careful, Eloise. Dukes marry dukes' daughters, not vicars' daughters who translate Cicero." "I know that." "Do you—" She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was that she didn't know anything anymore except that Thursday had become the center of her week and the Duke of Westmore had become the center of Thursday, and she was in very dangerous territory indeed. The Duke was not, as it turned out, in the parlor. He was in her father's study, standing in front of the bookshelf with his hands clasped behind his back and his attention fixed on the spines with an intensity that suggested he was either cataloging them or attempting to memorize their titles through sheer force of will. Your Grace, Eloise said from the doorway, you appear to have invaded my father's library. He turned. Today he was wearing gray. He was always wearing gray, she'd noticed, as though he'd decided on a uniform and refused to deviate, and the scar was very visible in the afternoon light. She'd stopped noticing it after the first visit. Now it was just part of his face. Part of him. Miss Hartley, I was admiring your father's collection. He has the complete works of Plutarch. In Greek. Can you read Greek? Enough to be dangerous. That wasn't an answer. Eloise moved into the room. I can read enough Greek to understand what Plutarch is saying. Not enough to appreciate the elegance of how he's saying it. My tutor used to say I had the grammar of a scholar and the vocabulary of a schoolboy. Your tutor taught you Greek. My tutor was my mother. She died when I was 16. The Greek died with her mostly. I maintain it through translation exercises and stubborn refusal to admit defeat. The Duke was quiet for a moment, then, I'm sorry about your mother. It was 7 years ago. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. No, Eloise thought, it doesn't. And he would know that, wouldn't he? A man with a scar like that, a man who moved like someone who'd learned to walk again after being taught he might never walk at all. Your father said you'd be in the study, she said, changing the subject with all the subtlety of someone throwing a rock through a window. I assumed he meant the parlor. I asked to wait here. The parlor is, he paused, performative. And my father's study isn't. Your father's study is where he actually works. Where you work, I suspect. There's a second writing desk by the window. That's yours. It wasn't a question. Eloise felt herself flush. How did you know? The inkwell is open. There's a translation in progress. And he moved closer to the desk, limping slightly, as he always did when tired. You're working through the letters to Atticus, letter 16. You know the letters. I told you. I read them at Cambridge. Most people read the speeches. Most people don't understand the difference between public facade and private truth. He was standing very close now, close enough that Eloise could see the silver threading through his dark hair, close enough to notice that he smelled like wool and wood smoke and something else, leather, maybe, or the particular scent of old books. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about what you said at the assembly, about needing an Atticus. I don't remember saying that to you. You said everyone needs someone who receives the honest version, the private one. Eloise's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. And I think you were right. I think, he stopped, started again. I think that's the most important thing a person can have, someone who sees the whole of you, not the facade, the truth underneath. Do you have that, someone who sees the whole of you? The question was too intimate. She knew it the moment it left her mouth. But he didn't step back, didn't retreat into ducal formality. Instead, he looked at her with those steady winter gray eyes and said, I'm beginning to. The air between them had changed quality, become something that pressed, something that demanded acknowledgement. Eloise should step back, should move to the other side of the room, should remember that he was a duke and she was nobody, and this, whatever this was, could only end badly. She didn't move. Your Grace, Lucian. I can't call you that. Why not? Because you're the Duke of Westmore and I'm the vicar's daughter and there are rules about these things. I'm tired of rules, he said it with sudden vehemence. I'm tired of pretending, of being handled, of having every conversation be a negotiation between what I actually think and what a duke is supposed to say. Then say what you actually think. I think, he stopped, took a breath. I think I have never met anyone who speaks the way you, he caught himself, the way you express yourself, the honesty, like letters instead of conversation. Eloise went very still. The way I write, he realized his mistake immediately. She watched it happen, the fractional widening of his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched briefly at his sides before he forced them to relax. The way you speak, he corrected, too quickly. I meant speak. The way you express yourself is unusual, honest. He was lying. She didn't know how she knew, but she knew. There was something underneath his words, something he wasn't saying. You're keeping a secret, she said. Everyone keeps secrets. Not from their Atticus. You're not my Atticus. No, Eloise said slowly, but you want me to be. You want me as your ally, your equal, your partner in something. The silence that followed was the longest 10 seconds of her life. Yes, he said finally. God help me, yes. They were interrupted. Of course, they were interrupted by Mrs. Drummond announcing that Reverend Hartley had returned and would His Grace care for tea. The Duke declined, made his excuses. Left with the same careful control he brought to everything, though Eloise noticed his limp was more pronounced than usual. Fatigue, probably, or emotion, and Eloise was left standing in her father's study trying to understand what had just happened. He'd almost told her something. Almost confessed. She was certain of it. But what? She went to her desk, pulled out paper, started writing before she'd consciously decided to write. Dear Corporal Ward, something strange happened today. The Duke of Westmore came to call again. He's been coming on Thursdays, and we were discussing Cicero, and he said something odd about the way I write, except he corrected himself, said he meant the way I speak. But here's the thing, he was lying. I know he was lying. There was something underneath it, something he wanted to say and couldn't. She stopped, stared at what she'd written. This was madness. She was writing to a soldier she'd never chitted about a duke who might or might not be developing feelings for her while she was quite definitely developing feelings for him. It was the kind of circular reasoning that philosophers use to prove impossible things. She kept writing. I've been thinking about what it means to know someone. Not the surface things, name, rank, title, but the real things, the things that matter. You and I have never met, Corporal Ward, but I feel like I know you better than I know people I see every day. Because I write to you honestly. I don't pretend for you. And the Duke Lucian, he asked me to call him Lucian, though I can't possibly, he doesn't pretend either. Not with me. He's careful, yes, but not performed. It's like he's forgotten how to pretend and is just starting to remember what honesty looks like. I find I want to know all of him, not just the Duke, the man underneath. The one who reads Cicero and knows the difference between public speeches and private letters. The one who limps and won't say why. The one who looks at me like I'm a text he's trying to translate. Is that foolish? Probably. Is it dangerous? Certainly. Am I going to stop? She paused, pen hovering over paper. No, she wrote. I don't think I am. She sealed the letter, addressed it to Corporal J. Ward, care of Westmore Hall, gave it to Mrs. Drummond to post, and didn't let herself think about the fact that Westmore Hall was where the Duke lived, that he would probably see the letter, that he might even know. That was paranoid, ridiculous. Dukes didn't open mail addressed to dead corporals, did they? But Westmore Hall, Lucian Ashford stood in his library with letter number 9 in his hands and felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff who had just looked down. She knew something was wrong. Not yet, but she knew he was keeping a secret. She'd looked at him in that study with those sharp, observant eyes and seen straight through his careful lies. He should tell her. Now, before this went any further. Before she wrote another letter to a ghost while falling in love with the man reading them. Before he fell any further himself. He'd been falling since the first letter. He knew that now. Falling slowly, carefully, like a man who'd forgotten how and was relearning the mechanics. But falling nonetheless. And today, in her father's study, standing close enough to see the ink stains on her fingers and the precise shade of brown in her eyes, he'd wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to hand her the 9 letters and say, this is how I know you. This is why I know the way you write. Because I've been reading your soul for 2 months and I am completely, irrevocably undone by it. Instead, he'd lied. Badly. And she'd known. He went to his desk, pulled out the unsent letter from March, read it again. I cannot send this, he'd written. You have elected me as your Atticus without your knowledge. But what if he sent it? What if he simply told her? The door to the library opened without knocking. Gerald Ashford entered without invitation. Both were typical. Cousin, Gerald said, we need to talk. Lucian set down the letter, carefully. His cousin had the instincts of a shark, any sign of blood in the water, and he'd attack. Gerald had always resented him, the eldest son who got everything while Gerald got scraps and sympathy. 7 years of watching Lucian inherit what he could never have. 7 years of waiting for his moment. About your continued refusal to engage with society, about your management of the estate, about, Gerald's eyes landed on the letter, your correspondence. My correspondence is none of your concern. Everything about this estate is my concern. I'm heir presumptive, and when you're declared unfit, I won't be. Won't you? Gerald moved closer. You've been hiding here for 6 months. You barely sleep. You refuse calls. You see no one except, he paused, except the vicar's daughter, every Thursday, very regular, very intimate. Lucian stood, slowly. Be very careful what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm observing. You visit Miss Hartley weekly. You dance with her at assemblies. You defend her against Lady Beaumont. Yes, I heard about that. The whole county heard about that. And now you're receiving letters addressed to—" He picked up the envelope Lucian had left on the desk. "Corporal J. Ward, who is, unless I'm mistaken, quite dead. Put that down. Why, what's in it? Love letters from some soldier's widow, blackmail material, evidence of your continued mental instability." Lucian crossed the room in 3 strides, took the letter from Gerald's hand with enough force that his cousin actually stepped back. "Get out," Lucian said quietly. "Or what? You'll have me thrown out." "By what authority?" "The authority of a man who talks to dead soldiers. The authority of the Duke of Westmore, which I am last I checked, and which you are not. Now get out." Gerald smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. 6 weeks, he said. "That's how long it will take to prepare the petition. 6 weeks, and I'll have 3 doctors testifying that you're unfit to manage your own affairs, let alone a duchy. 6 weeks, and this house, this title, everything, it'll all be mine. Or at least under my management until such time as you recover your senses." He moved toward the door, paused. "Enjoy your Thursday visits while you can, cousin. I suspect the vicar's daughter won't be quite so interested once you're declared incompetent. And those letters," he glanced back at the desk. "I've been bribing your porter, by the way. I know all about them, every single one from Miss Hartley. They'll make excellent evidence at the hearing. Nothing says delusional quite like a duke conducting secret correspondence with a young woman under the guise of being someone else." He left. Lucian stood in the center of his library with 9 letters from a woman who trusted him and 1 letter he'd never sent, and the absolute certainty that he was running out of time. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to tell Eloise the truth before Gerald took everything. 6 weeks to figure out how to confess that he'd been reading her private letters without permission. 6 weeks to make her understand that he hadn't meant to deceive her, that he just needed her words. Needed to know that somewhere in the world there was a person who spoke honestly, who thought deeply, who understood what it meant to pretend and how exhausting that pretense was. 6 weeks to make her his ally, or lose everything trying. He looked at the unsent letter in his hand, then he looked at the 9 letters she'd sent. The 9th one, the one that had arrived today, was still in his hand. He read what she'd written about him, about wanting to know all of him, about him looking at her like a text he was trying to translate, about not stopping even though it was dangerous. Lucian sat down, put his head in his hands, and for the first time in 6 years, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, the laugh of a man who'd forgotten how and was just now remembering. But it was real. She wasn't going to stop, and neither was he, and Gerald could go to hell. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Didn't write "Dear Miss Hartley." Wrote instead "Dear Eloise," then stopped, because he still couldn't send it. Not yet. Not until he'd figured out how to tell her without losing her. But soon. 6 weeks, Gerald had said. Lucian would need less than that. He would tell her. He would make her understand. He would offer her something Gerald could never challenge: a partnership, an alliance, marriage to a duke who saw her as an equal, not an ornament. He would offer her Westmore and the library and the freedom to translate Cicero and publish under her own name and speak her mind without fear. He would offer her everything he had and pray it was enough. The 5th Thursday came with rain. Eloise had written 3 more letters to Corporal Ward, letters 10, 11, and 12, each one more personal than the last. Each one a catalogue of her conversations with the Duke. Each one a confession that she was falling for a man she couldn't have. She'd just sealed number 12 when Mrs. Drummond appeared with an expression that suggested the apocalypse was occurring in the parlor. "His Grace," she said, "has requested to speak with you privately, in your father's study. He seems—" She paused, agitated. Eloise's heart kicked against her ribs. "Where's my father?" "At the church. I sent word. He said to tell you he trusts your judgment," which was, Eloise thought, either a vote of confidence or a complete abdication of parental responsibility. Possibly both. She went to the study. The Duke was standing by the window with his back to the door. His shoulders were rigid, his hands were clenched at his sides. Even his usual careful posture had abandoned him. He was leaning heavily on his good leg, the bad one clearly paining him. He looked like a man preparing for battle. "Your Grace," Eloise said. He turned. His face was God, his face. There was something raw in it, something desperate. "I have to tell you something," he said, "and you're going to hate me for it. But I have to tell you anyway because Gerald is filing a petition to have me declared mentally unfit in the 6 weeks, and if I don't tell you now, I'll never have the chance." Eloise closed the door behind her. "Tell me what—" He crossed the room, picked up a bundle from her father's desk. Letters, tied with string, her letters. These are yours, he said. I should have given them back immediately. I should have. He stopped, started again. Corporal Ward died at Waterloo. In my arms. I held him while he bled out. The letters came to Westmore because his mother used to work there. That's why they were addressed to my house, and he held out the bundle. I read them. All of them. Every single one. I know I should have redirected them. I tried to write to Mrs. Calvert. I tried a dozen times. But I couldn't stop reading. Couldn't stop needing them. Needing to know there was someone in the world who thought the way you think, who spoke the way you speak, who understood what it means to strip away pretense and just be honest. Eloise took the letters. Her hands were shaking. You read them, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Yes, all of them. Every word, multiple times. I have them memorized. The one about Hadrian's Wall, the one about silence. The one where you said you wanted to be someone's Atticus. His voice broke. I wanted to be yours. I want to be yours, but I can't ask that without telling you the truth first. Eloise looked down at the bundle of letters in her hands. 12 letters, 2 months of her soul laid bare to a man she thought was a stranger. To a man who turned out to be you, she said. You were reading them the whole time. When we met at the assembly, when you came here on Thursdays. You knew everything I'd been thinking, everything I'd been feeling, and you didn't tell me. I tried. I almost told you a dozen times, but he stopped. There's no excuse. I was selfish. I wanted to keep receiving them. I wanted to know you, the real you, not the version you performed for Dukes. And I knew if I told you, you'd stop writing. You'd retreat. You'd become what everyone else expects you to be instead of who you actually are. So you lied. Yes. For 2 months. Yes. Eloise felt something rising in her chest. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, more dangerous. I wrote to you, she said quietly. I wrote to Corporal Ward about you, about the Duke, about falling in love with someone I couldn't have. And you read those letters too. He flinched. Yes. Letter 9, letter 10, letter 11. I wrote about wanting to know all of you, about how you look at me, about... She stopped. Her voice was shaking now. About things I would never have said if I'd known you were reading them. I know. You let me bare my soul to you. Twice. As the Duke and as the reader. And you knew the whole time that I was falling in love with both versions of you without knowing they were the same person. Eloise. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't call me that. You haven't earned the right to call me that. You were not the audience I chose. That's what makes this a violation. Not that you read them, though. That's bad enough, but that you pretended to be someone else while doing it. You took my trust and you used it. The words landed like a blow. She watched him take it. Watched the way his face went very still and very blank and very much like the face of a man who'd expected this and was no less destroyed by it for having anticipated the damage. You're right, he said. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand something. Gerald is filing a petition to have me declared unfit. He's going to argue that my behavior since Waterloo, the isolation, the nightmares, the refusal to engage with society, is evidence of mental instability. And if he succeeds, I'll lose everything. Westmore, the estate, my freedom, everything. And you need me because a married Duke can't be declared incompetent without his wife's testimony. And because you're the only person I know who's smart enough to fight Gerald and win. And because he stopped. Because you're the only person who's ever seen the whole of me and didn't look away. You're the only ally, the only true partner I've ever had. Eloise stared at him. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to be my partner, my ally, my equal in this fight. I'm asking you to help me fight Gerald and save Westmore. And yes, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because I need a decorative wife who nods at dinner parties, but because I need someone who thinks like you do. Someone who, his voice went rough. Someone I've been in love with since the second letter. The words hung in the air between them. In love with. Since the second letter, 2 months ago. You don't love me, Eloise said. You love the version of me that exists on paper. The one who doesn't have to look you in the eye while saying these things. The one who can be honest because she thinks she's writing to a stranger. No. He stepped closer, then seemed to think better of it, his bad leg clearly bothering him. I love both versions, the woman who writes letters and the woman who argues with me about stoicism. The one who gets dirt under her fingernails, and the one who translates Cicero, and the one who looked at my scar and didn't look away. I love all of you, every part, even the parts you think I shouldn't see. You saw them without permission. I know, and I'm sorry. God, Eloise, I'm so sorry. But I'm not sorry I know you. I'm not sorry I fell in love with you. I'm only sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Eloise's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the letters down on the desk before she dropped them. I need time, she said. I need to think. It's too much. You're asking me to forgive you for 2 months of deception and marry you and fight your cousin and all at once, and I can't process all of this at the same time. How much time? I don't know. A week, 2 weeks. She stopped. How long until Gerald files his petition? 6 weeks. Then you have 4 weeks to convince me you're worth the risk. 4 weeks to prove you're not just using me as a strategic asset. 4 weeks her voice broke, to show me that the man I fell in love with in those letters is the same man standing in front of me. Because right now I don't know which version is real and which is the facade. Lucian nodded slowly, like a man accepting sentence. 4 weeks, he said. I'll take it. And Eloise, she looked up. For what it's worth, neither version is a facade. They're both me. They've both been me from the start. I just needed your letters to remember how to be that person out loud. He left limping more heavily than she'd ever seen. Eloise stood in her father's study with 12 letters in 4 weeks and the absolute certainty that she was about to make either the best decision or the worst decision of her life. Possibly both. The letter arrived at Westmore Hall on Friday morning, less than 24 hours after Lucian had confessed everything and walked out of the rectory study feeling like a man who'd just cut out his own heart and handed it to someone with no obligation to keep it beating. Jarvis brought it on the breakfast tray with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what it was and had opinions about the Duke's chances that he was too well trained to voice. From Miss Hartley, Your Grace. Lucian's hands shook as he took it. Actually shook. He set down his coffee to hide the tremor and broke the seal with more care than he'd used to defuse artillery at Waterloo. The handwriting was the same, that leftward tilt, the rhythm he'd memorized over 2 months of reading her soul. But the salutation was different. Your Grace, it began. Not Dear Corporal Ward, not even Dear Lucian. Your Grace. He'd lost ground, expected it, deserved it, read on anyway. You asked for 6 weeks to prove yourself. I'm giving you 4. Not because I'm merciful, I'm not feeling particularly merciful at present, but because Gerald's timeline is your problem, not mine, and I see no reason to organize my decision-making around your cousin's malice. 4 weeks, 28 days. In that time, I expect the following: 1, absolute honesty. No more secrets, no more careful omissions. If I ask you a question, you answer it completely, even if the answer makes you uncomfortable, especially if it makes you uncomfortable. 2, partnership. You said you need an ally. Prove it. Show me what that means in practice. I want access to the estate records. I want to understand Gerald's case. I want to be treated like someone capable of strategic thinking, not like a decorative asset you're deploying against an enemy. 3, the rest of the truth. You told me you read my letters. You told me you fell in love with the woman who wrote them. What you didn't tell me is why you were in a position to read them at all. Why Corporal Ward's correspondence came to Westmore Hall. Why you were holding him when he died. Why you carry guilt in your eyes every time his name is mentioned. I want the whole story, not the edited version, the one with blood and grief and all the parts you think I can't handle. 4, space. I need room to think, to process, to decide whether the man I'm falling for is worth the risk of tying my entire future to his. So you will not call on Thursdays. You will not send flowers or poetry or whatever it is dukes send when they're courting. You will give me the respect of distance until I'm ready to close it. In return, I offer you this. I will read whatever you send me. I will consider your case fairly, and I will give you an answer in 4 weeks. Not a promise, not forgiveness, just consideration. If that's not enough, say so now, and we can end this cleanly. If it is enough, then start by answering this question. Why did you keep the letters? You could have destroyed them, burned them, pretended they never existed, but you kept them. Why? I await your response. E. Hartley. Lucian read the letter 3 times. Then he sat at his desk, pulled out paper, and wrote for 2 hours straight. When he was finished, he had 12 pages, single-spaced, no crossouts. The most honest thing he'd written since the unsent letter in March. He sealed it, addressed it to Miss E. Hartley, sent it with a writer who had instructions to wait for a response. The response came 6 hours later, a single line. Good. Now tell me about Waterloo. The correspondence that followed was unlike anything Lucian had ever written, unlike anything he'd ever allowed himself to write. She asked for Waterloo and he gave it to her. Not the clean version. Not the heroic narrative that got told at dinner parties. The real one. The sound of the cannons, the way the ground shook. The smell, God, the smell of black powder and blood and men dying in the mud. The way time slowed down and sped up simultaneously. The way you stopped thinking and just moved, just followed orders, just survived from one moment to the next. The way John Ward had looked when the cannonball took him. The way he tried to speak and couldn't. The way Lucian had held him and promised to write to his mother and known even then that no letter would ever be adequate to the task of explaining why this man was dead and Lucian was alive. He wrote about the guilt, about coming home to Westmore and walking through rooms that felt too big and too quiet, about Lady Cecily taking one look at his face and realizing the man she'd agreed to marry had died somewhere in Belgium, and the thing wearing his skin was something else entirely. He wrote about the nightmares, about waking at 3 in the morning with his heart trying to break through his ribs, and the absolute certainty that he was still there, still in the mud, still watching men die. He wrote about reading her first letter and feeling something shift, something small but real. The first moment in 6 months when his mind had focused on something other than the past. I kept your letters, he wrote, because they were the only thing that made me feel human. Because you wrote to a stranger with more honesty than most people manage with their families. Because you said things I'd been thinking and couldn't articulate. Because you made me remember what it felt like to think about ideas instead of just surviving moment to moment. I kept them because they saved my life, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, letter by letter, word by word. You reminded me that there was still a world out here worth engaging with, that intelligence mattered, that honesty was possible, that somewhere in Northumberland there was a woman who thought about Hadrian's Wall the same way I did, as a thing that endures without needing to justify itself. I kept them because I was falling in love with you and didn't know it until it was too late to stop. He sent the letter. She wrote back the same day. Tell me about Lady Cecily. So he did. He told her about the engagement that had been arranged when he was 25 and she was 22. About how he'd liked Cecily well enough she was intelligent, well-read, good company at dinner parties. About how he'd thought that was enough, that marriages were built on less. About how he'd written to her from Belgium. Careful letters, edited. Nothing about the blood or the fear or the way he'd started talking to God at night, even though he didn't believe in God, because there was no one else to talk to. About coming home with a scar that ran from temple to jaw and a limp that wouldn't quit and nightmares that made him dangerous to sleep next to. About the way Cecily had looked at him when she saw the scar. Not with revulsion, she was too well bred for that, but with a kind of careful distance. The look of someone reassessing an investment. About the conversation 3 weeks later, when she'd asked if he intended to continue in his previous social engagements, when he'd said no. When she'd asked if he intended to take up his seat in Parliament, when he'd said not yet. When she'd asked when he thought he might feel ready to resume normal life. When he'd said he didn't know, when she'd said very gently that perhaps they should reconsider the engagement, that she had certain expectations for her life as a duchess, that she needed a partner who could fulfill those expectations, that she was sure he understood. He'd understood perfectly. She wanted the Duke, not the man, and the man had come back from Belgium too damaged to pretend convincingly. I didn't blame her, he wrote to Eloise. I still don't. She was honest about what she wanted. The fault was mine for thinking I could be that person, for thinking I could go to war and come back unchanged, for thinking scars were only physical. But I'll tell you this, I have never once in the years since wished I'd fought harder to keep her, because she wanted a facade. And you want the truth. Even when the truth is ugly, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's me at 3 in the morning with my hands shaking and my mind in Belgium and no ability to articulate why. You want the whole of me, and that's worth more than 100 perfect facades. Her response came the next morning. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm not sorry you're not married to her. Because you're right, she wanted the facade. And the facade is the least interesting thing about you. Now tell me about Gerald. The Gerald letter took 3 days to write, partly because the situation was complicated, partly because Lucian kept starting and deleting and starting again, partly because writing about Gerald meant acknowledging things he'd been avoiding for 6 months. Gerald Ashford was 7 years younger than Lucian, the grandson of the 4th Duke's younger brother, heir presumptive since Lucian had no children and showed no signs of acquiring any. Ambitious in the way that second sons were always ambitious, hungry for power they'd been born too late to inherit. He'd been angling for control of Westmore since Lucian came back from Belgium. Small things at first, suggesting he take over certain estate management duties while Lucian recovered. Offering to represent the family at social functions Lucian couldn't face. Positioning himself as the responsible one, the capable one, the one who could be trusted with actual authority. Lucian had refused, partly from stubbornness, partly from instinct. There was something off about Gerald's concern, something performative. The care of a man who wanted to be seen caring rather than a man who actually cared. And then 3 months ago, Gerald had started gathering evidence, medical opinions from doctors who'd never examined Lucian, but were willing to speculate about the psychological effects of war trauma. Testimony from servants about the Duke's irregular hours and antisocial behavior. Servants Gerald had been systematically bribing for months. Records of declined invitations and canceled social engagements. A pattern of withdrawal that could be read as either grief or incapacity, depending on how you chose to interpret it. Gerald was choosing incapacity. The petition he was preparing would argue that Lucian was unfit to manage the estate, that he needed a guardian, Gerald, conveniently to oversee his affairs until such time as he recovered, that this was for Lucian's own good, for the good of the estate, for the good of everyone except Lucian himself. I should have seen it coming, Lucian wrote, should have been more careful, should have forced myself to attend more functions, accept more invitations, perform normality more convincingly. But I couldn't. The thought of going to London, of sitting through dinners and making conversation and pretending I was fine when I very clearly wasn't, I couldn't do it. So I didn't. And Gerald is using my honesty against me. The irony is not lost on me. I spent 6 years learning to perform, to be the Duke my father wanted, the officer Wellington needed, the fiancée Cecily expected. And the one time I stopped performing, the one time I just existed as I actually am, it's being used as evidence of insanity. That's why I need you. Not just because a married duke can't be declared incompetent without his wife's testimony, but because you understand the difference between honest struggle and actual incapacity. Because you know what it means to be punished for refusing to perform. Because you're smart enough to fight Gerald's case and win. But I'll be honest, that's not the only reason I want to marry you. I want to marry you because you make me want to be honest. Because you write letters that make me think. Because you argue with me about stoicism, and you're usually right. Because you look at my scar and you don't look away. Because you translate Cicero for fun and get dirt under your fingernails and speak your mind even when it costs you. I want to marry you because I love you. And I know you don't believe that yet. I know you think I'm in love with the woman who wrote the letters. But I'm in love with all of you. The woman who writes and the woman who speaks. The one who's brilliant and the one who's brave and the one who's currently furious with me for very good reasons. I'm in love with you, Eloise, and I will spend the next 4 weeks proving it if you'll let me. He sent the letter and waited. The response came 3 days later, the longest 3 days of Lucian's life. 3 days of checking for writers every hour. 3 days of starting letters he didn't send. 3 days of going slowly mad in a library that felt too big and too quiet and too full of her absence. When the letter finally came, it was short. I need to see the evidence. Gerald's petition, the medical opinions, the testimony, all of it. If I'm going to help you fight this, I need to know exactly what we're fighting. Bring it to the rectory. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. And Lucian, stop apologizing. Start strategizing. We have 4 weeks to dismantle your cousin's case. Let's not waste time on guilt when we couldn't be planning his destruction. Your partner in probable treason. E. Lucian read the letter 4 times, stopped on the same phrase each time. Your partner, not your ally, not your potential ally, your partner. Present tense, he smiled, the first real smile since the confession. The smile of a man who'd been given a second chance and intended to earn it. Then he went to his study and pulled every piece of evidence Gerald had gathered. Every letter, every medical opinion, every testimony, organized it by category, by weakness, by the exact points where Gerald's case could be attacked. If she wanted strategy, he'd give her strategy. If she wanted partnership, he'd show her what partnership looked like. And if she wanted him to stop apologizing and start fighting, then God help Gerald. Because Lucian Ashford had just remembered he'd been an intelligence officer before he was a duke, and intelligence officers knew how to wage war. Eloise was waiting for him in her father's study when he arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. She'd rearranged the furniture, pushed the desks together to create one large working surface, cleared everything else to the sides, created a war room. You're punctual, she observed. You said 2 o'clock. Most dukes interpret specific times as suggestions. I'm not most dukes. No, she said, looking at him directly for the first time since the confession. You're not. The air between them was different than it had been 4 days ago. Still careful, still uncertain, but no longer quite so fragile. As if the letters had built a bridge and they were both testing whether it would hold weight. I brought everything, Lucian said. He set the portfolio on the desk, wincing slightly as his bad leg protested. Gerald's draft petition. 3 medical opinions, none from doctors who've actually examined me. Testimony from 7 servants, all of whom Gerald has been systematically bribing for 6 months. A timeline of my social engagements since returning from Belgium, annotated with his commentary about concerning behavior. Eloise opened the portfolio, started reading. Her expression didn't change, but Lucian saw the moment she understood how serious this was. How carefully Gerald had built his case. He's not wrong, she said after several minutes. I beg your pardon. About the symptoms, the social withdrawal, the irregular hours, the nightmares he has testimony from a housemaid about hearing you wake at night, the refusal to attend Parliament. It's all true, isn't it? Yes. Then we can't argue the facts. We have to argue the interpretation. She looked up, met his eyes. You're not incapable. You're recovering. There's a difference, and we need to make that difference clear to the court. Gerald's doctors claim there isn't. Gerald's doctors haven't examined you. That's the weakness in his case. He's asking the court to declare you incompetent based on speculation from men who've never met you. We need doctors who have examined you, who can testify that you're managing the estate competently, that you're making sound decisions, that your withdrawal is prudent recovery, not evidence of instability. Lucian felt something settle in his chest, the relief of being heard, of being understood. I don't have doctors who've examined me, he said. I refused medical attention after Belgium, seemed pointless. Then we get them now. You have 4 weeks. That's enough time for 3 evaluations. Enough time to build a counter case. She was writing as she talked, making lists, organizing strategy, her mind working like a machine designed for exactly this kind of problem. We also need character witnesses, people who can testify to your competence. Wellington, if possible. Other officers from your regiment. Estate managers who can confirm you've been handling business appropriately. I haven't been handling business. I've been hiding in my library. Have you been signing documents, reviewing accounts, making decisions about tenant issues? Yes, but then you've been handling business. You've just been doing it quietly. Gerald wants to interpret that as incapacity. We're going to reframe it as efficiency, as a man who doesn't need constant social validation to function effectively, as someone who values substance over performance. She was magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Standing in her father's study in a dress with ink stains on the cuff's hair escaping its pins, organizing a legal defense with the same focused intensity she brought to translating Cicero. You're enjoying this, Lucian observed. I'm enjoying having something useful to do. I'm enjoying being treated like someone capable of strategic thinking. I'm enjoying, she stopped. Yes, I'm enjoying this. Is that a problem? No, it's perfect. You're perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm angry with you, and I'm helping you anyway, and I haven't decided if that makes me admirably principled or catastrophically stupid. It makes you exactly who I thought you were, who I fell in love with. Eloise set down her pen, looked at him properly. The first long look since the confession. You can't keep saying that, she said quietly. Why not? Because I don't know if I believe it yet. And every time you say it, I want to believe it. And wanting to believe something is dangerous when you're trying to think clearly. Then I'll stop saying it until you're ready to hear it. You'll stop saying you love me because I asked you to. I said I'd give you honesty. That includes honest restraint. I love you. That's not going to change. But I can stop telling you about it if it helps you think clearly. That's what partners do. What allies do. We support each other's needs even when they're difficult. She studied his face, looking for something. He didn't know what. Didn't know if she found it. 4 weeks, she said finally. 4 weeks to build a case against Gerald. 4 weeks to prove you're competent to manage your own life. 4 weeks to show me that this partnership you're offering is real. And then I'll give you my answer. That's all I'm asking. Is it? She tilted her head. Because I think you're asking for considerably more than that. You're asking me to trust you after you lied to me for 2 months. You're asking me to tie my entire future to yours. You're asking me to fight a legal battle that could destroy both of us if we lose. You're asking, she stopped, took a breath. You're asking me to take a risk that terrifies me. I know. Do you understand what you're asking? I'm 23 years old. I have no money, no connections, no power except my mind. If I marry you and we lose to Gerald, I'll be the wife of an incompetent duke with no legal standing and no future. If I don't marry you and you lose, I'll be the vicar's daughter who refused a duke and will spend the rest of her life wondering if I made the right choice. You're right, I'm asking too much. Yes, you are, and I'm going to help you anyway, because, she pressed her fingers to her temples, because I read your letters. And I believe you when you say you fell in love with mine. And I think maybe I fell in love with you too, both versions. The one who danced with me and the one who read my words. And I don't know if that's enough to build a marriage on, but I think it might be enough to build a partnership on. Eloise, don't say anything. Just work with me. Show me what partnership looks like. And in 4 weeks, I'll tell you if it's enough. Lucian nodded slowly. 4 weeks, partnership, strategy. No more declarations of love until you're ready to hear them. Thank you. But Eloise, yes, when you are ready, when you've decided, I'm going to tell you again. And I'm going to keep telling you until you believe it. She smiled, small, unpracticed. The smile of a woman who was still angry and still hoping and still terrified and still brave enough to try anyway. 4 weeks, she repeated. Now sit down, we have work to do. Lucian sat, and for the first time since Waterloo, he felt like a soldier again. Like someone with a mission, a purpose, a reason to fight. He had 4 weeks to save Westmore. 4 weeks to prove himself to Eloise. 4 weeks to build a partnership that could withstand Gerald's malice and society's judgment and the particular terror of loving someone brave enough to demand honesty. 4 weeks. He'd survived worse. They worked until dark, until Mrs. Drummond knocked to announce dinner, until Eloise's father returned from visiting parishioners and found them surrounded by papers, with their heads bent together over testimony transcripts and their hands almost but not quite touching on the desk between them. Reverend Hartley took one look at the scene and retreated without comment. He'd been watching his daughter over the past weeks, watching her come alive in a way she hadn't since her mother died. Watching her engage with ideas with strategy, with a man who seemed to value her mind as much as her father wished he himself had done more often. He'd been a good father, he thought, but perhaps not an attentive one. Perhaps he'd let his grief over losing his wife blind him to the fact that his daughter needed more than parish accounts to occupy her brilliant mind. The Duke of Westmore, for all his scars and shadows, saw that, valued that, needed that. Reverend Hartley was not a fool. He knew what was happening in his study, and he had decided to trust his daughter's judgment. Your father is very understanding, Lucian observed after the door closed. My father is very aware that I'm going to do what I want regardless of his opinion. He's chosen to interpret that as independence rather than defiance. It's taken him 23 years, but he's finally learning. Wise man. He has his moments. She shuffled papers into neat piles. We'll need to meet again. Tomorrow, if possible. We should draft the counter petition. Get started on witness lists. Tomorrow is Saturday. Is that a problem? It's not a problem. I thought you wanted space. Distance. I do, but I also want to win, and winning requires work. So we work together. She paused. We keep it professional, strategic. No more confessions, no more emotion. Just partnership. Professional partnership. For 4 weeks. Yes. And then we'll see. Lucian gathered his papers, stood favoring his good leg, looked at her in the lamplight with ink on her fingers and determination in her eyes and thought, I am going to marry this woman. He didn't say it, but she must have seen something in his face because her expression softened, just slightly. Lucian, yes. I read your letters, the ones you sent this week, about Waterloo and Cecily and Gerald. And she stopped. I want you to know I understand why you kept my letters, why you couldn't tell me, why you needed them. You do, I've been writing to a stranger for 2 months because I needed someone to be honest with, someone who wouldn't judge me or try to make me smaller or more acceptable. You needed the same thing. You just found it differently than I did. That doesn't excuse the deception. No, but it explains it. An explanation isn't forgiveness, but it's something. It's understanding, and understanding is partnership. So, she met his eyes. Thank you for being honest. Finally. Thank you for giving me the chance to be. He left before he could say anything else, before he could reach for her hand or tell her he loved her, or do any of the dozen things he wanted to do and knew he couldn't. Not yet. 4 weeks. He could manage 4 weeks. Probably. He managed 3 days. 3 days of professional partnership. 3 days of meeting at the rectory to draft legal documents and plan strategy. 3 days of sitting across from her and being acutely aware of how close she was and how carefully she was keeping distance between them. 3 days of watching her mind work, of seeing her tear apart Gerald's medical opinions with the same precision she brought to translating Latin, of hearing her construct arguments that were so good, so airtight that Lucian actually started to believe they might win. 3 days of falling more completely in love with her than he'd thought possible. And then on the fourth day, Gerald showed up at the rectory. Lucian was there when it happened, had just arrived for their 2 o'clock meeting, was in the parlor waiting for Eloise when Mrs. Drummond showed Gerald in without announcement. Cousin of Gerald said, "How domestic, working from the vicar's parlor now. What do you want, Gerald, to see the woman who's taken up so much of your attention? Miss Hartley, I presume." Eloise appeared in the doorway. She'd been in the study. Had ink on her fingers and papers under her arm, and an expression that suggested she'd heard her name and come to investigate. She took one look at Gerald and understood exactly who he was. "Lord Gerald," she said, not a question. "Miss Hartley, I've heard so much about you. The vicar's daughter who writes to dead soldiers and dances with dukes. Quite the social climber." The air in the room went very cold. "I think," Lucian said quietly, "you should leave." "Should I? But I've only just arrived, and I wanted to meet the woman who's helping you fight my petition, because you are fighting it, aren't you, the two of you? Crafting arguments, building a defense, thinking you can convince a court that a man who talks to ghosts is fit to manage a duchy." "I don't talk to ghosts." "No. Then what were those letters, the ones addressed to Corporal Ward, the ones Miss Hartley has been sending you for 2 months?" Gerald's smile was sharp. "Oh yes, I know about the letters. I've known for weeks. I've been bribing your porter. At Westmore, did you not think to check your own servant's loyalty, cousin? I know she thinks she's writing to a soldier. I know you've been reading them without her knowledge. And I know that when this comes out in court, when I present evidence that the Duke of Westmore has been conducting a deceptive correspondence with a young woman under the guise of being someone else, it's not going to look like romance. It's going to look like the behavior of a disturbed mind." He turned to Eloise. "How does it feel, Miss Hartley? Knowing he's been lying to you, reading your private thoughts without permission, using your trust to feed his own delusions." "Get out," Eloise said. Her voice was flat, cold. "Now. Or what? You'll defend him. You'll stand in court and testify that his behavior is normal, appropriate, the action of a sound mind." Gerald laughed. "Please do. I'd love to watch you try to explain how an eligible duke conducting secret correspondence with a vicar's daughter is anything other than evidence of instability." "I said get out. Make me." Lucian moved before he'd consciously decided to move. Put himself between Gerald and Eloise. Spoke very quietly. "You have 5 seconds to leave before I throw you out myself, and cousin or not, petition or not, I will enjoy doing it." Gerald looked at him, at Eloise, at the papers she was still holding. 4 weeks, he said. "That's all you have. 4 weeks and I bury both of you. The Mad Duke and the social climber. It's almost poetic." He left. Lucian turned to Eloise. She was pale, shaking, but her eyes were absolutely furious. "He's going to use the letters," she said. "Yes. He's going to make it sound like you're delusional, like I'm complicit in your delusion. Yes. He's going to destroy both of us. He's going to try." She set down the papers, looked at him properly. "We have to get married," she said. Lucian's heart stopped. "What? We have to get married before the hearing. It's the only way to neutralize his argument. If we're married, the letters become correspondence between engaged parties. Not deception, not delusion, just courtship. Unconventional, yes, but not insane." "Eloise, he's right about one thing. If this comes out in court and we're not married, it looks bad. It looks like you were deceiving me, using me. But if we're married, it looks like what it actually is. Two people falling in love through letters. It's romantic, not mad. It changes the entire narrative. You said you needed 4 weeks. I did, but that was before Gerald threatened to use my letters as evidence of your insanity. Now I need," she stopped. "Now I need to protect both of us. And the only way to do that is to make this official. to become your partner, your ally, your equal not just in strategy but in law. This is not how I wanted to propose to you. You already proposed to me 2 weeks ago in this very room. I'm just accepting. With conditions. What conditions? She took a breath. I'll marry you. I'll testify on your behalf. I'll be your partner in fighting Gerald. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me this is real. Not strategy, not desperation, not a legal maneuver to save Westmore. Promise me you actually want to marry me, that you actually love me, that this isn't just convenient. Lucian crossed the room, took her hands, looked at her with every ounce of honesty he possessed. I love you, he said. I have loved you since the second letter. I will love you until I die. This is not strategy. This is not convenience. This is me asking you to be my wife because I cannot imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else. Because you are my ally, my equal, my partner in every way that matters. Even though I'm angry with you. Especially because you're angry with me. Because you're angry and you're helping me anyway. Because you demand honesty and you deserve it. Because you're brilliant and brave and you don't let me hide. Because you see all of me and you're still here. Even though I'm a vicar's daughter with no money and no connections. I don't care about money. I don't care about connections. I care about you, about partnership, about building a life with someone who sees me, really sees me and doesn't look away. Someone I can be honest with. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Eloise's eyes were wet. She blinked hard. If we do this, she said, if we get married, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to be a decorative duchess. I'm going to publish my translations. I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to be exactly who I am, and society is going to hate it, and you're going to have to defend me. I know, and I will, gladly. I'm going to embarrass you at dinner parties. I'm counting on it. I'm going to argue with you about philosophy. Please do. I'm going to, her voice broke. I'm going to love you, and I'm terrified, because I've never done this before, never trusted anyone like this. And if you break that trust, if you lie to me again, I won't. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. I can promise that if I do, I'll tell you immediately. I can promise to choose honesty even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I can promise to be your partner, your equal, your ally in all things. She looked at their joined hands, at his face, at the future they were about to commit to. 2 weeks, she said. We have 4 weeks until the hearing. Let's get married in 2. Give ourselves time to prepare the case. Time to, she smiled shakily, time to write our vows. I assume you want them to reference Cicero, obviously. And Hadrian's Wall, essential. And partnership, the foundation of everything. She laughed. It came out wet and rough and completely genuine. Then ask me properly, she said, not as strategy, not as defense against Gerald, just as you, as Lucian, the man who read my letters and fell in love with the woman who wrote them. Lucian got down on one knee, his bad leg protesting the movement, but he didn't care. Eloise Hartley, he said, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my ally, my Atticus? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being honest with you? Will you? His voice went rough. Will you let me love you for real? Forever. Starting now. Yes, she said, and pulled him to his feet and kissed him. It was not a practice kiss, not a perfect kiss. It was the kiss of 2 people who'd been falling in love on paper for 2 months and were just now learning how to love each other in person. It was clumsy and honest and absolutely everything. When they finally broke apart, Eloise was smiling, really smiling, the smile of a woman who'd taken a terrifying risk and found it worth taking. 2 weeks, she said, and then we fight Gerald. Together. Together, Lucian agreed, as partners, as equals, as allies in all things. And for the first time since Waterloo, he felt like a man who had something worth fighting for, something worth living for, something worth being honest for. Her.